Well, good afternoon. Am I live? Okay, good. And to begin with, and in the interest of full disclosure, my name is Frank White. I grew up not too far from here in a place that many people know, Walhalla. And I'm known to most people as Frank White, but how many people out there know me as Francis or Coco? I feel like I'm coming back home and I recognize some of the faces, and I think that's kind of neat. I walked in here today and I noticed I haven't been in this building for 50 years. The last time I walked in here, I was watching a movie, and I think it was Billy Jack. I'm kind of dating myself, but that was 50 years ago, and it brought back a lot of pleasant memories, and I'm so happy to be back here and addressing this group of people. I got an email last January from the people at TEDx and asked me, would you like to share some of your views on leadership, more specifically on community leadership? And I've been doing this for about 40 years. I was a sociology professor at the University of North Dakota. I'm recently retired, and you'll see in my speech today, you'll hear a lot of sociology, a lot of psychology in that presentation. I'm very proud of that, and it comes very easy to me. So having said that, I'll just kick it off and give you a couple of brief perspectives on what I see as leadership and what I thought about when they said, can you come back and speak about small towns and big ideas? And I think I encompass that. I had those big ideas when I left, and I did come back as well. One of my first perceptions of leadership that I picked up very quickly is that leadership is not about positions or status or titles. Leadership is about action. It's a verb. It's what we do. And more specifically, it's what we do for others. It's what we do as far as service to others. We're all in the community. We're all stewards. We're all involved in helping other people meet their needs, especially in a smaller community. And I think that's very important. True leaders, effective leaders, never lose the focus that the main asset in any community is the people's needs, and are they being met? And the second thing I think that's wonderful about leadership, it's always flexible. It's always evolving. It's always being applied to a different context, today to smaller communities. And leadership doesn't always roar. You know, it doesn't always have to be formally introduced. Sometimes leadership is disguised. I'm listening to the speakers today, and I see the leaders disguised as, a teen dog musher from Cavalier that competes in the Iditarod. Later today, you'll hear about a farm wife from Pembina. Opening remarks today about a young female mayor of Cavalier. That's what's kind of cool about leadership. When you see people who do that, it often comes disguised or in different forms, like volunteers, paras, assistant coaches, teammates, classmates. And I bet a lot of you can agree with me here too. The greatest leader I was ever associated with and the best teammate I ever had was my mother. What she did with us and what she had to work with, and the budget she had, and what her kids were able to do and how she bettered that. I haven't seen anybody do that as far as political leaders or corporate leaders or educational leaders. And we have them all around us, especially in those smaller communities. Over my lifetime, I've done a lot of speaking, and again, I mentioned this is my favorite topic, leadership and effective leadership. And I've looked at people from all different walks of life and used a lot of different biographies as far as what makes someone successful in that particular field. And there's about 4, I don't think there's any more, but you could add, but there's basically 4 abilities, 4 gifts. I like to refer to them as there's 4 superpowers that people are able to engage with others and are able to be very, very effective in what they do. You can label them the way you like, but here are the ones I'd like to share with you today. Number 1, ask yourself, is that leader able to communicate with others? Now, a lot of people think that communication, those are people that are good talkers, and there's an aspect to that. But again, you heard some of the speakers already. People who are good communicators, people are very, very good at listening. And when you listen to other people, if you're in a community, do you know that community? Have you listened to its members? Have you listened to what their concerns are? There's a knowledge about that. When you look at a smaller community here, today in Cavalier or Langdon or Walhalla, you look at that community identity. You look at the community culture, the community values. You know, when you look at that, a lot of these towns in North Dakota are over 100 years old. There's a very firm identity here and a culture. A good leader understands what needs to change and what needs to stay the same. And if you can take that information and you can translate that into a very effective vision, that makes you a pretty effective leader. And when I talk about a vision, I'm talking about, you know, a dreamlike state where anything is possible. Martin Luther King didn't have a good idea. He didn't have a strategy. He didn't have a philosophy that went to committee and came back with 6 different iterations or algorithms. He had a wild, dreamlike state where anything was possible. And I think that's what we got to do today. We've got to dream big. North Dakota, we have a culture here that has a tendency to make us all a little more modest. You know, this is a time we should be thinking, we should be legendary. I'm very, very proud of the time I spent as a member of the board of directors with the Pembina Gorge back in my home community. And I remember being impressed and inspired by a lot of the board members and a lot of the community members as well when they were saying things like this. You know, the Pembina Gorge is the best kept secret in North Dakota. We should make this the Medora of the Northeast. We should be legendary. That's what a vision is. That's what we should be thinking about and do more of that, to be legendary, to communicate, and not just to communicate, but to translate that information and that knowledge into a vision that's very hopeful, very inspiring, and very, very workable. Not everybody can do that. A second ability, or superpower, if you will, is that do they have the ability to unite others? To bring people together. You hear these words too. You hear words like chemistry, harmony, the esprit de corps, synergy, solidarity. You know, think about bringing people together. Think about how difficult that is today with diverse societies, changing demographics, changing immigration rates, you know, different cultural wars, cultural clashes, political divides, national, regional, local levels. Just take this group here today. Look around your group today too, and look at the divides we have just in here. People sitting with their friends, same community, same people they walked in with, may or may not know the person next to them. You know, not that that's good or bad, it's not a judgment, but if you have an ability to bring people together and to unite, that's pretty impressive, and it's not that easy. It's easier said than done. The ones who are able to pull this off, I think they just hearken back and they look very quickly at the very definition of leader or leadership. If you look up the definition of leader, it's from the Old English, ladari. And ladari means, it means a guide, to guide someone on a journey to a particular destination. You don't force people to follow you. You invite them on a journey. You invite them on an odyssey. You invite them on an adventure. You invite them on a mission. And I'll bet you can agree with me here too. Not all missions, not all leadership is successful right off the bat. It's not a straight line, okay? If you look at David and Goliath fame, David didn't start out to be a general or to be a leader or to be a king. He started out delivering sandwiches to his brothers on the battlefield, and Goliath got in the way. Goliath here is a great metaphor, very symbolic of the detours and disappointments and the failures and the obstacles that we're going to face as we embark on that particular journey and as we try to invite others to follow us and get to a particular destination. And when people do this, the ones that are very good at this, you know, instead of having an S like Superman on their chest, they could probably have the letter I. The letter I for invite, or more specifically here, to include others. We need to make that table bigger. We need to make that table larger. I taught a class at the University of North Dakota for many, many years. Very popular class, topical course called Drugs and Society. And I was involved in a lot of the principles and the philosophy of trying to decrease the teen drug use in the region, but regionally as well. And we worked in a lot of those different task force. And the one thing we found out that, after 40 years, and think about if you grew up in this era, we grew up with this anti-drug legislation and prevention like DARE, Drug Abuse Resistance Education, Scared Straight. How many people remember this commercial? They got this egg on a frying pan, they go, this is your brain. And they got a frying over here, and they're going, this is your brain on drugs. The intentions were good, the outcomes, sad. A lot of people are looking at that. You know what they found out in some of the focus group visits? Some of the young kids watching that would not eat eggs anymore. and older kids who were starting to use, they were looking at that saying things like this. What would look good at that? Some hash browns and maybe some bacon. They lost credibility, and sadly we found out that, actually we were starting to see an increase in teen use from 40 years of all that strategy, prevention, research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't until recently that we started to include, to invite a cohort that's been largely missed from that particular discussion at the table, and that was the teens themselves. We invite teens. Now, teens listen to teens. Teens have unique experiences. Teens have thoughts. Teens have energy. Teens are very good in the mass media, technology, whatever. You see that now, and I see it at high schools when I speak. Social impactors, social influencers. That's a very important cohort, and I see it in communities now too. Younger people, female mayors. When you see this particular group, we got to make that table larger, and we can't ignore people because we've done that in the past. We've got to change that aspect when it comes to inclusion. And there's a second side of that inclusion coin, and you probably already figured this out here too. It's leaders have to lead by example, especially in North Dakota. We don't want that distance and those titles and different lifestyles and living different places. The leader has to be involved in that group effort, in that journey. They call that in the field, they call it leading from the middle. They have to get involved in the middle. Other places they refer to it as sometimes leadership requires fellowship. They got to follow the leaders too. That's so very important. Boy, when I saw some of my leaders who were working with us and beside us, that made a big difference on how much I worked towards that. And you can see that in people looking at this too. I think of a quote that goes very nicely here too. Helen Keller, and she said, alone we can do so little. Together, synergy, we can do so much. That's a good principle when you're looking at effective leaders. The third superpower, I think, is the heart and soul of all effective leaders. And do they have the ability to inspire others? To inspire. Inspire comes from the Latin root, inspirare. And inspirare means to breathe into, to breathe life into, to awaken a particular feeling in someone, a particular passion, an intense emotional drive. Think back to that time you went to a concert and you didn't just hear the music, but you felt it. I think back to some of the great speakers and orators and teachers and pep talks that I've been lucky enough to hear, and how I just didn't hear the message, I felt it. And I wanted to do something and walk right away. I watch teams today. I'm a big sports fan. I watch teams, and when I see a championship, like in the UND hockey team, when they win a championship and they all flow on the ice hollering and screaming and jumping on each other, I always look to whomever with, I go, when's the last time you felt like that? Feeling and passion is so very important. And with passion, you can't fake that. That's got to be genuine. That's got to come from within. That's got to be organic. When you look at that aspect about that, the reason why a lot of people don't become passionate leaders is because many of us substitute our passion for security. I hear it in my field quite a lot. I'd like to be a teacher, but there's no money in that. I'd like to be a coach, but I can do better elsewhere. There's better perks putting my time into that effort. We see that a lot of times where people, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they substitute their passion for security. The ones that do not, those speakers, the comedians, the performers, the teachers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, those people that have found their passion and they share that, passion has a very, very important side effect, and that's that it becomes a multiplier. Okay, it has a multiplication effect. I think very quickly of an example here today that I bet a lot of you can relate to with me. The Caitlin Clark story. that has really taken off the last couple of months, but it's been around for a while, but the last couple of months. Caitlin, a basketball player from the University of Iowa, she got beaten in the national championship game by the University of South Carolina. And after her team was beaten, the coach from the opposing team, Don Staley, said in the press conference at the championship banquet conference, she said, "I want to personally thank Caitlin Clark for lifting up our sport." She said, "You are one of the GOATs." Now, when you're called a GOAT by an opposing player, the greatest of all time, you see a very inspiring multiplying effect here, and that's that Caitlin Clark had a very transcendent effect, not just on her teammates, the people from Iowa, women's basketball, but an entire generation. She became must-see TV. When you look at what she did in the last couple of months, I'm reminded by these simple truths here. Number one is that 3 years ago, the NCAA would not let women's basketball use the name March Madness in their tournament. This year, she was the face of that tournament. When she turned pro last week, her jersey number 22, which is for her birthday, January 22, the Indiana Fever number 22 sold more jerseys in one day than the entire Dallas Cowboys football team collectively sold in an entire year. Now, what that tells you, and that's the transcendent, inspiring, multiplying effect, she didn't just raise up a sport, but she broke down a lot of gender barriers, age barriers. She did something and she lifted up, and we know that it's not just young women buying basketball jerseys and playing basketball. No, it's young men, older men who are watching this. People who are not even basketball fans are watching this now too. My 88-year mother can't wait to watch Caitlin Clark play every time she's on TV, and I love all of it too. And it can go on, but that's a good example of how passion can be very, very contagious. My secretary used to say, "God, when Frank leaves my office, I'm typing faster, I'm talking faster." She said, "Don't want to have him around all the time." The other thing about passion is that very, very important here too. Passion shows how much you care. I learned it very early on in my teaching career that students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. They don't care about the initials behind your name, how many college degrees you have. They're not reading your resume, how you're dressed, if you're telling jokes all the time. Do you care? And when you have that type of currency, you can move mountains there too, but you have to show that. And I'll summarize that passion and that uniting aspect about leadership with a quote from Maya Angelou that you saw earlier. Not that quote, but the author. Maya Angelou said, people will forget what you say. They'll forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. That is a powerful, powerful motivator. And sometimes we don't always display that for whatever reason. The fourth one, which I think is the most important of all, I call it the X factor. If you want to go from being a good leader to a great leader, the greatest of all time, the great leaders have this ability, and it's the ability to see the potential in someone before they see the potential themselves. I'm going to repeat that. The ability to see the potential in someone before they see that themselves. I can't overemphasize that enough. And I'll personalize it a little bit here too. When I talk about my journey from Walhalla and being a high school jock, pretty much a class clown. I don't think too many people saw that professor on the horizon, myself included. But I remember going to school and I thought, if I could just be a high school wrestling coach, I'd be happy with that. If I could just get a college degree and I'd be satisfied with that. And I think I would have been too. My expectations weren't that high, pretty much ordinary. And my mother and father were very pleased we just get a college education. They were, to tell the truth, they were happy with a high school graduation, and I was too. But there was a teacher I really admired, and she was I'd call her the GOAT in education. She was that good. I mean, she had all the awards. She made a connection with everybody. Everybody loved her. She was good in the social aspect, the academic aspect, everything. And I used to take all of her classes, and I'd listen to everything she'd say, and I'd hopefully pick up a tidbit here and whatever. Later on, we took a graduate class together. We ended up in the same class, and we were studying one afternoon. And just out of the blue, she said, you know, Frank, you're going to be a great educator. And I was absolutely shocked. I'm not telling. I was shocked by it because no one was saying that. Not my parents, not my friends, not my teachers, not my coaches, and certainly not my college. Nobody. No, it just wasn't in the cards. And I remember sitting there and I go, because I thought so much of her. And I said, really? And she said, yes. She said, you know, Frank, you have a great deal of emotional IQ. She said, you have a passion for psychology and sociology. You're a great storyteller, she said. You have boundless energy. You're going to make a connection. You're going to have a very bright future if you choose to be an educator in higher ed. And I remember thinking at that moment, what a difference that had made. Nobody else has said that. I don't know if I showed any spark or passion or uniqueness, but she saw something. She saw potential in something, and she made a point to share it. And what a difference that made. And I tell students this today too. I go, you know, if you want to be an effective or a great leader, don't tell them about your superpowers. Tell them about theirs. And she told me about what superpowers she thought I had. And I'll tell you, it was a transformative effect. I never looked at myself the same after that. I still refer to that day. I remember it, that day as my second birthday. I changed the way I looked at myself. And more importantly, I changed the way I looked at everybody else and how I'd watch teachers or performers or someone doing a public appearance, and I would say to myself, I could do that. I could do that differently. Not better, but I could do that differently. Why not be a college professor? You know, it doesn't look that tough to me. I could pull that off. And I never looked back, and I think about this too because I retired 2 years ago, and I got this question a lot on my retirement at all the different interviews I was given. They asked me this all the time. Frank, who were your role models? Who did you mentor your teaching after? And you know, I answer that question and I go, with all due respect, I never modeled my teaching after anybody. I never wanted to be like anybody else. I thought a lot of my teachers were boring. This was the 1980s. This was MTV. This was the World Wrestling Federation. You know, this was an exciting time to be booming and spontaneous and funny and engaging, and I wanted to burst on the scene and be like that and be entertaining. I didn't want to be like anybody else, and that style that was unique and it fit my personality. Like I said, I didn't even know what emotional IQ meant, but I went and looked it up after she said that, and I go, you know, I do got a skill set here, and I followed that too, and it's made a big difference with me too. What she gave me that day, just a little simple exchange. She gave me the permission. She gave me the license. She gave me the courage to chase my North Star and to dream big, bold, and better than anything I ever thought about myself. And I bought it. I followed that, and it made a big difference. You know, Mark Twain says very succinctly here, he said, you know, the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. The day you find out your purpose. If you're going to be a great leader, help someone find their purpose, their gift, their passion, their North Star. Because that's the kind of leadership that communities need, and that's the one that's going to leave a lasting legacy. When you talk about legacy, a lot of leaders will leave money and belonging, and thank God, that's great. But I'm talking about a life legacy where your dreams, beliefs, your interests and your values will live along after you because you've had that kind of impression on the next generation that's going to follow. Thank you very much, and I hope you find your North Star too.